She came stomping down the hill with her sunglasses and clipboard like she owned the lake. My daughter just wanted to fish, but the woman called the cops before I could even say a word. What none of them knew. My girl was holding the papers that would stop the badge in its tracks and remind everyone on that hill exactly whose land they were standing on. If you believe in standing your ground with grace, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more real stories that hit home. It was the kind of morning you hold your breath to keep from breaking. Mist curled off the lake like steam from a mug, and the only sound came from a lone heron sweeping low over the water. My daughter sat at the edge of the dock, her bare feet skimming the glassy surface, rod in hand, eyes as still as the pines behind her. She was 12 but carried herself like someone much older, and in that moment, she looked like she belonged to the water itself. I was halfway through a quiet coffee, flipping through a worn paperback on the porch, when the knock came. Not a polite tap or neighborly hello, but a flat-palmed smack against the railing, hard enough to make the mug tremble in my hand. I looked up, and there she was, short, square-shouldered, with a pair of mirrored sunglasses perched on her face and a clipboard clutched like a weapon. Her polo shirt was tucked too tight into khaki capris, and her mouth had already curled into something sour. "Excuse me," she barked, not bothering to introduce herself. "Is that your child down there?" I didn't stand right away. Years of teaching in city schools had taught me that posture mattered, that stillness unnerved certain people more than shouting ever could. I glanced past her toward the dock. My daughter hadn't even turned around. The bobber was twitching, her focus unbroken. "Yes," I said, slowly closing the book and setting my cup aside. "She's mine. She can't fish there." The words came with the conviction of a verdict. No preamble, no reason offered, just fact, spoken like law. I stepped down one creaking stair, trying to keep my voice even. "Ma'am, that's our dock." "No, it's not," she snapped, flipping through the stack of papers on her clipboard. "This section belongs to the Pine Ridge Lake Association. Children under 16 are prohibited from using the dock without adult supervision and a seasonal pass." "I'm right here," I said, taking another step forward. "And that's our cabin, our dock, our land." She didn't blink, just shifted her weight and looked back toward the road, as if summoning reinforcements. "I don't see a badge, sir. And until you can prove you're an official resident, I'm going to have to ask her to leave the waterline immediately." I almost laughed but stopped myself. The word official hung in the air like the sound of a match being struck, small but dangerous. She wasn't here to chat. She was here to challenge. "Can I ask your name?" "I'm the acting president of the HOA," she replied, as though it were self-explanatory. "Karen Lively, elected by unanimous decision after Mr. Thompson passed. I take property violations very seriously." "Well, Ms. Lively, I suggest you take a second look at your map," I said. "That dock's been part of this cabin for 47 years. Built it with my father before you probably even moved up here." She bristled. "That may be what you think, but boundaries shift. Codes evolve. If you don't comply, I'll have to escalate this. And don't think you can play the sympathy card with that little girl. We've had incidents with children before." That was when my daughter finally turned. She didn't stand, just turned her head slowly and looked up toward us, her eyes calm, questioning. I could see the edge of the red folder beside her on the dock bench, the one I'd told her to keep close, just in case. I took a breath. "We're not going anywhere. Not until you show me where it says our dock is part of your jurisdiction." She clucked her tongue and tapped her pen against the clipboard, then turned and walked back toward the road with stiff steps, pulling out her phone as she went. "I'll let the sheriff explain it to you," she called over her shoulder. "Maybe he'll have better luck getting you people to listen." I felt my jaw tighten, but I said nothing. Just watched her disappear past the mailbox, phone pressed to her ear, her voice already rising in pitch as she spoke to someone who wasn't there to see the stillness of the lake, the patience in my daughter's hands, or the old nails still holding that dock together. I sat back down on the porch step. My daughter looked at me, and I gave her a small nod. She turned back toward the water. The bobber twitched again. Whatever fish was down there hadn't noticed the storm brewing above. She came back 15 minutes later, still clutching that clipboard like it was a sheriff's badge, sunglasses still on despite the clouds rolling in across the lake. Her stride had a bounce now, something triumphant in the way she climbed the slope toward the porch as if she'd just won a battle no one else knew had begun. Behind her came a slow-moving golf cart with two more women in tow, one holding a tiny dog in a sweater and the other adjusting a visor like she was teeing off on the 10th hole. Neither looked at me directly, but both gave my cabin a long once-over, eyes tracing the porch, the roofline, the old wooden swing. Karen didn't bother with a greeting this time. She planted herself at the foot of the steps and began speaking like someone halfway through a speech she'd been rehearsing in the mirror. We've had multiple complaints from neighboring property owners regarding unauthorized use of Pine Ridge recreational access points. Your daughter was observed fishing alone, unsupervised, on what is designated shared community property, which violates Section 4 of the updated bylaws ratified last spring. I've contacted the sheriff's department and expect them shortly. I didn't interrupt. I just leaned forward slightly, hands resting on my knees, and waited until she ran out of breath. She reminded me of a substitute teacher I'd once worked with, the kind who memorized every rule but couldn't name a single student. She looked proud of herself, like someone who finally got to say all the lines she'd been saving for years. "We're not part of your HOA," I said when she finally paused. "This cabin predates the association by decades. You can check the county records." Karen gave a thin smile. "You may not have signed in, but that doesn't exclude you from participation in community rules. There's implied consent when you use the lake. That's common law." I could feel the tension behind my eyes beginning to build, the way it used to on bad mornings in courtrooms where people quoted law they didn't understand. I stood slowly, careful to keep my voice level. This land was deeded to my father in 1975. The lake access came with it, along with rights to the dock and shoreline. There's no easement, there's no encroachment, and there's no implied anything. She blinked behind her glasses, just once, before the smile returned. "You can either comply voluntarily or wait until law enforcement explains it to you more clearly. Your daughter needs to leave the dock immediately." That was when the lady with the dog stepped forward, not speaking to me but addressing Karen. "Are you sure we should escalate? I mean, maybe they just don't know the process. It could be a misunderstanding." Karen didn't even look at her. "It's not a misunderstanding, it's non-compliance. That child is violating community space." I looked back at the dock. My daughter was still seated, knees drawn to her chest, chin on her arms. She wasn't crying. She wasn't afraid, just watching. She had that stillness in her again, like the lake itself, unmoved by wind. "She's not violating anything," I said. "That dock is ours. It always has been. You might run a neighborhood newsletter, but you don't own the land beneath our feet." Karen pulled the sunglasses down to the tip of her nose and looked at me directly for the first time. Her eyes were the same pale green as the lichen on the rocks by the water's edge, cold, fixed. "People like you always think the rules don't apply to them," she said. That was when I understood. This had nothing to do with fishing or bylaws or clipboards. It was about authority, about her needing to feel taller than someone else, to have the last word on a porch that didn't belong to her. She didn't care about lake rights or dock ownership. She cared about being the one who got to say yes or no. The golf cart hummed quietly behind her, still idling, the dog whining in its sweater. The other women looked less certain now, like maybe they had been pulled into something deeper than they meant to wade. But Karen was all in, boots sinking into the muddy ground of a fight she couldn't win. I took one step down, just enough to meet her at eye level. "If the sheriff wants to have a conversation, I'll be right here. But until then, don't speak to my daughter, don't look at her, and don't assume we're the ones who need permission to be here." She straightened, drawing the clipboard close to her chest again like a shield. I watched her jaw clench, a little tick near the corner of her mouth pulsing. Without another word, she turned and walked back toward the cart. The other women followed, slower now, their eyes flicking back once or twice, unsure of whether to offer a smile or stay silent. Karen didn't look back. She climbed into the passenger seat, sat stiffly, and crossed her arms. The cart rolled away down the gravel path, tires crunching with each slow turn. Behind me, the lake stayed quiet. My daughter raised her hand in a small wave. I raised mine in return. The first time she saw the lake, she didn't say a word. She stepped out of the truck, still wearing her seatbelt across her chest like she hadn't realized the drive was over. and just stared. It had taken us 7 hours to get there. Her backpack was crumpled at her feet, the corner of a comic book sticking out. I remember how her shoulders dropped when the breeze touched her face, like some part of her remembered how to breathe. It had been a hard year. After her mother passed, silence became our language. Meals got quieter, bedtime shorter, answers shorter still. Grief didn't crash through our lives like a wave. It seeped into everything like water into floorboards. Slow and certain. There were days she wouldn't speak at all. Days I wasn't much better. We tried therapy. We tried church. We tried long walks around the block. But it wasn't until that first morning at the lake that something in her finally moved. She asked if she could sit by the edge alone. I told her she could. She didn't come back for hours. I'd bought the cabin a few months earlier, not out of impulse, but out of memory. My father had taken me there when I was a boy. Back then it didn't even have plumbing, just a wood stove and a pump out back. But it was ours. It sat tucked between the pines like a secret, with a narrow footpath leading to the dock and a porch swing that creaked like it remembered everything. My father used to call it a place where clocks give up. I didn't know what he meant until I brought her there. That first summer, we fixed things together. The railing was loose, so we sanded and sealed it. She learned to use a power drill before she ever asked for a phone. The roof needed patching, so we climbed it slow, one shingle at a time. She was afraid of the ladder, but didn't say it. I just saw it in the way she lingered with one hand on the frame before her feet left the ground. We caught fireflies in jars and let them go before bed. We cooked pancakes that stuck to the pan and fed most of them to the raccoons. She asked questions again. She laughed at things that weren't forced. One night, I found her sitting by the lake after midnight, arms around her knees, looking up at the sky. I asked if she was okay. She said, "Mom would have liked the stars here." That was the first time she said her name in weeks. She began to draw again, pages and pages of the dock, the trees, the curve of the lake from the cabin steps. I hung the best ones on the fridge, even though the tape curled in the humidity and they always fell off. She made one of me, sitting on the porch with a book and coffee. She drew herself beside me with wild, unbrushed hair and big eyes. It wasn't pretty, but it was real. The neighbors were kind at first. Some brought over casseroles or fishing lures, or just stopped to say welcome. Most were older, retired couples who used the cabins a few times each year. A few asked quiet questions about where we were from, how long we planned to stay, but no one pushed. There was one man, Mr. Hargrove, who showed her how to cast a line without losing the hook in the branches. She loved that. She kept the lure he gave her in a little tackle box labeled "Treasures" in crooked handwriting. By the end of summer, the lake had folded itself around her like a blanket. She learned the path through the trees by heart, knew where the moss got slick in the rain and where the chipmunks hid under the porch. She kept a rock on the dock that she said was hers, and if you moved it, she would know. One afternoon, she caught a trout almost bigger than her arm. I have a photo of it, her smile wide, sun in her eyes, both hands gripping the rod like a sword. That summer wasn't perfect. She still had nightmares sometimes. She still asked me if I was okay when she didn't have the words for herself. But something had shifted. The cabin gave her space. The lake gave her rhythm. And the silence that used to sit between us like a wall became something gentler, something shared. Now, when I see her on the dock with her rod in hand, I see more than a girl fishing. I see the long road we took to get there. I see the quiet courage in every steady breath, every calm cast. I see my daughter claiming something for herself. That woman with the clipboard couldn't possibly understand what this place means to her. It's not just land. It's not just property. It's the one place where she felt whole again. The one place where silence wasn't heavy, but healing. She was back before noon, walking faster this time. Her sandals slapped the gravel with short, angry strides, the clipboard still under her arm but now joined by a printed sheet that flapped slightly in the breeze. From the kitchen window, I watched her glance toward the dock, then up at the porch, then back to the dock again, like she couldn't decide which of us to scold first. My daughter remained seated, her back straight, shoulders calm. She had cast her line long before the woman appeared and wasn't about to reel it in just because someone with a fresh printout and loud voice didn't like it. I opened the screen door before she could knock again. She didn't even pause at the bottom of the steps. I've given you the benefit of the doubt, she said, holding the sheet out like a citation. But I've now confirmed with the HOA board that your family is not listed on any of the accepted property rolls. This is community land, and what you're doing is trespassing. I didn't reach for the paper. I didn't need to. Her voice told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't here to listen. She was here to declare, to corner. We've already talked about this, I said. The dock is on my property. That's our deeded lakefront access. Your board has no say over it. She squinted at me, her sunglasses hanging from the collar of her shirt now. Her expression twisted, not confused but annoyed, like someone being forced to explain something they thought was obvious to someone too stubborn to understand. There's no record of your family on the spring registry. Your daughter is violating rules we all agreed to. I've warned you once. I'm warning you again. If she doesn't leave that dock in the next 5 minutes, I'm calling the sheriff. I didn't speak right away. I let the words hang in the air between us, softening only by the rustling of the pine trees and the ripple of the water. Her threat didn't surprise me. It was how she said it, as if she expected me to panic, as if she thought the word sheriff would make me crumble. You can call whoever you like, I said quietly, but I suggest you tell them to bring a map and a copy of the county parcel list. Her lips parted, then shut again. She wasn't used to resistance that didn't raise its voice. She stepped back and pulled her phone from her pocket, jabbing the screen with her thumb. I could hear the tone as it connected. She turned slightly, enough to look official, as if being watched justified the posture. Hi. Yes. This is Karen Lively. I'm at Pine Ridge, Lot 7, and I need an officer to respond to a trespassing situation. There's a young girl fishing alone on HOA property. The adults are refusing to comply. Yes. I'm the acting president. She paused, watching me with a look of thin satisfaction, as if now, backed by someone in uniform, her argument had grown a spine. She's down at the waterline, alone. No identification. Doesn't appear to be a resident. The way she said it made something hot rise in my chest. My hands were still at my sides, but I could feel them twitch slightly. I took one step closer, not to intimidate, just enough so she could hear me clearly. My daughter has every right to be there, I said. This isn't a community dock. This isn't shared space. That's our dock. That girl's name is on the deed. If you call the sheriff, you better be ready to answer why you're filing a false report. She turned her back to me and kept speaking, lower now, into the phone. I couldn't make out the words, but I could see her shoulders stiffen when I mentioned the deed. The kind of stiff that comes not from fear, but from realizing the story might not unfold the way she imagined. I stepped off the porch and walked down to the dock. My daughter looked up from her rod, not worried, just waiting. She called the sheriff, I said. I figured, she replied. You want me to come in? Not yet, just stay calm. Keep your folder close. She nodded and returned to watching her line, like this wasn't the first time a grown-up had gotten something wrong and made it louder than it needed to be. I stayed with her, standing quiet beside the bench, eyes on the horizon. If a storm was coming, we'd be ready. The first officer pulled up in a white SUV that looked too clean for gravel roads. The seal on the door read County Patrol, with a gold star too large for the doorframe and lights that pulsed once before shutting off. A second SUV followed close behind, slower, careful not to kick up too much dust. I stayed near the dock while my daughter remained seated, rod in hand, the red folder tucked under her arm like I'd told her. Karen was already waving as they parked, striding toward the officers like they were old friends. She pointed, first at the cabin, then toward us. Her voice carried across the water, high and sure. She spoke in the same tone I'd heard at school board meetings and parent conferences, the kind people used when they believed the law was on their side before it had even arrived. The taller officer approached first. Sandy blonde hair, maybe early 30s, clear blue eyes behind wraparound sunglasses. He looked professional but tired. The second one followed at a slower pace, shorter, softer around the edges. Neither put a hand on their belt. That told me they weren't treating this like a real emergency. You folks, the property owners here? The taller one asked. We are, I said. Is there a problem? We got a call about a possible trespasser, a minor down near the shoreline. Woman over there said she's not part of the registered HOA and refused to leave when asked. I let out a quiet breath. That woman is mistaken. The dock is on our parcel. We've owned this cabin for years. My daughter has every right to fish here. The second officer looked toward my daughter. She didn't flinch, didn't wave, just sat there, steady as ever, like the whole world could come undone and she wouldn't drop her line. "Can I see some identification?" the taller officer asked. His tone was neutral, but his stance had stiffened slightly. "Just so we can confirm ownership." "I've got it inside. Give me a moment." I started walking back toward the porch when Karen's voice rang out again, sharper now. "She's not even supposed to be here," she said, marching closer. "She's a child. No supervision. No community pass. That dock belongs to the Lake Association. We have rules for a reason." The shorter officer held up a hand, not to stop me, but to quiet her. "Ma'am, let's let the gentleman get his paperwork. We'll sort it out." "She's been sitting out there all morning like she owns the place," Karen hissed. "What kind of father lets his kid do that?" I stopped on the first step, turned slowly. Her words didn't hit hard, they slid cold under the skin, sharp in their calculation. "My daughter's been through more than you'll ever understand," I said, "and she's earned every quiet moment that Doc can give her." Karen opened her mouth again, but this time the officer cut her off. "Let's give him space to get the deed, all right?" I stepped inside and retrieved the folder. It was kept in the drawer with the emergency flashlight and extra batteries. A red plastic binder marked cabin papers in my handwriting. My daughter had helped organize it last summer, carefully slipping each page into a clear sleeve. The deed was near the front, her name printed below mine, legal, binding. I handed it over without a word. The officers examined it. The taller one took longer, tracing his finger along the parcel number and notes in the margin. He nodded once, then again, more firmly. "This matches the county records," he said. Karen stepped forward, leaning over their shoulders. "That can't be right. The registry doesn't show this family. I checked twice." "They're not on the HOA list," the officer replied, "because this parcel isn't part of the HOA. It's private property. Has been for a long time." For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the soft slap of water against the dock and the ticking engine of the idling SUV. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came. She looked from the officers to me, then past me to the cabin, as if the place might have changed shape in the last few minutes. The shorter officer handed the folder back. "Everything looks in order. Sorry for the trouble." "No harm done," I said, "but I'd appreciate it if she stopped coming around accusing a child of trespassing." "We'll make a note of it," the taller one said. Karen's arms folded tight across her chest. Her sunglasses went back on, even though the sun had dipped behind the clouds. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the road. Her shoes crunched loud against the gravel, but her silence was louder. My daughter looked back at me. I raised the folder in a small salute. She smiled, just a little, and turned back toward the water. The bobber floated easy on the lake, right where it belonged. The deputies had barely left when the real trouble arrived. I was stacking firewood near the side shed, trying to clear my head, when I heard tires spinning against loose gravel. This time it wasn't a patrol SUV, but a large black truck, official markings on the door, and a radio antenna whipping behind it like a tail. The sheriff's vehicle, unmistakable. It pulled up faster than the others had, brakes pressing hard, stirring up a cloud of dust that drifted across the pine trees. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Sheriff Delaney. I recognized him right away, though we'd never met. Square build, clean khaki shirt tucked in so tight you could see the creases, mirrored sunglasses, hand resting near his belt like it had always belonged there. He didn't walk. He strode. There was a difference. 2 more deputies followed in a second vehicle, both younger, both moving with the quick, alert steps of officers trained to expect resistance. One of them already had his hand on his radio. The other glanced toward the dock, then toward the cabin, then back to Delaney. I stood still beside the woodpile, hands empty, heart beginning to beat a little louder. Karen was already halfway down the path, waving again. Her voice rang out clear. "That's him, Sheriff. That's the man. And his daughter's still down on the dock like nothing happened." Delaney didn't respond. He looked toward the water first. My daughter hadn't moved. She was still seated, rod balanced across her knees, that folder now tucked behind her, one hand resting gently on it. From here, she looked like part of the lake itself, calm and patient, waiting out the storm. Then he turned his attention to me. "You the owner of this property?" he asked, walking up without offering his name. "I am," I replied, standing my ground. "My name's James Holloway. This is my family's cabin. You got ID?" I nodded and reached slowly into my pocket, pulling out my wallet and handing over my license. He examined it without a word. Karen stepped closer again, already pointing toward the trees. "I've told him several times. This lot isn't on the HOA registry. His daughter's been down there all morning. Alone. Unsanctioned dock usage. She's a minor." Delaney raised a hand to quiet her. "Appreciate the report, Miss Lively. I'll handle it from here." "But—" "From here," he repeated, his voice flat and final. Karen clamped her mouth shut but didn't leave. She crossed her arms and stepped back just far enough to stay close. "I've already shown the county deputies the deed," I said. "It's in my daughter's name, passed through me. The dock is ours, always has been." "Got that paperwork on you?" Delaney asked. I walked back to the porch, retrieved the red folder, and brought it down to him. He didn't take it immediately. He looked me over once, then glanced again at the girl by the lake. When he finally did take the folder, he opened it with slow, deliberate fingers. The silence stretched long as he read. One of the younger deputies leaned toward Karen. I couldn't hear the words, but whatever he said made her shoulders stiffen. She looked away, toward the woods. Delaney closed the folder after a few minutes and handed it back without ceremony. "Everything checks out," he said. "You're not under HOA jurisdiction. That dock's within your parcel boundary. You're within your rights." Karen took a step forward, ready to argue. "Sheriff, this can't be right. He's not even listed." He turned toward her then, sharp. "Ma'am, you've made your report. The Holloways are not in violation. This is private property. If you continue to escalate without cause, it becomes harassment." She blinked, her jaw clenched, but she said nothing. Delaney looked back at me. "Sorry for the inconvenience. Just doing our due diligence." "I understand," I said, "but I'd like this on record. My daughter was accused of trespassing and treated like a criminal. She's 12. She hasn't done anything wrong." He gave a short nod. "It's noted." The deputies returned to their vehicles. Delaney followed, slower now, the tension in his shoulders less sharp than when he arrived. Karen didn't move. She stayed rooted near the gravel, arms tight across her chest, eyes narrowed behind those ever-present sunglasses. I returned the folder to its place and walked down to the dock. My daughter looked up at me, unreadable at first. Then she asked one question. "Am I still allowed to fish?" I smiled and sat beside her. "This is your dock," I said. "You don't need permission to be who you already are." She nodded once and turned back to the lake. The water rippled gently around the pilings, and the line slipped back out into the current, as steady and sure as it had been all morning. They didn't ask my name until it was already over. The sheriff and his men were almost back to their vehicles when one of the younger deputies hesitated. He looked at the cabin, then at the dock, then back at me. His brow furrowed just slightly, like a memory trying to take shape. "Sir," he said, stepping away from the cruiser, "did you say your last name was Holloway?" I nodded. "James Holloway." His head tilted. "You related to Walter Holloway? Man used to teach history at Mountain Creek High back in the 60s? I felt a small smile begin to form. "That was my father." The deputy let out a breath, almost a laugh. "Well, I'll be. He taught my grandfather. Everybody in this county knew that man. Wrote the book about the Veterans Trail, right?" "That's the one," I said. "He built this cabin with his own hands, fished from this same dock." The deputy turned to the sheriff, who was already seated in the front seat of the black truck, engine humming softly. "Sheriff, you hear that? This is Walter Holloway's son. They own this land outright. I remember hearing the story about how he fought the county on zoning back in the day." The sheriff didn't respond, but his eyes met mine in the side mirror. For a second, something in his posture changed, just enough to let me know the name meant something. Not respect exactly, but recognition. The kind that shifts the tone in a room without a word being said. Karen was still standing by the road. Her arms had dropped to her sides now, and she looked smaller somehow. The name hadn't landed with her yet, or maybe she didn't care. But the people who'd been here long enough knew what it meant. My father was the one who fought to keep the lake open when the county tried to dam it. He was the one who brought veterans together to clean up the trails, to build the footbridge, to mark the stones where wildflowers grow every spring. He wrote letters, gave speeches, showed up in court with facts and maps and more patience than anyone gave him credit for. And when it was done, when the zoning dispute was settled and the county backed off, he bought this land and carved a quiet life into it. That legacy wasn't on a clipboard, but it was rooted deep, in every plank of the dock, in every nail driven into the porch, in the trees that still stood because he said no to those who wanted them gone. Guess that makes this place a piece of local history, the deputy said with a grin. I suppose it does, I answered. The younger officer walked back to the car and climbed in. Karen stood frozen, her mouth partway open, lips pressing together without a word. I walked back up the path, not hurrying, not showing anything on my face. The sheriff's vehicle reversed, tires crunching slow against the gravel. He didn't wave, but he nodded. I returned the nod without smiling. My daughter was still on the dock. She looked up and asked if it was finished. I told her it was. She asked if the woman was gone. I said, for now. Then she said something that stuck with me. She's not used to people telling her no. I looked out over the lake, the sun warming the shallows again. The clouds had cleared, and the mist was lifting near the edge of the trees. No, I said, she's not. But we didn't yell. No, we didn't have to. She smiled and turned back to her rod. Later that day, when we walked into town for ice cream, the man behind the counter recognized the name too. Said he remembered my father talking about building a dock wide enough for a wheelchair just in case he ever needed one. He never did, but the dock stayed wide. My daughter stood a little taller after hearing that, like something about her place in the world had gotten steadier. It's funny how a name carries weight without being heavy, how it hangs in the air long after a person is gone, not because of what they demanded, but because of what they protected. She came back the next morning, but not with the same sharp steps or squared shoulders. Her walk was slower, more cautious, the clipboard still in her hand but held against her chest now, like it wasn't quite so important. She paused near the road and looked toward the dock, before she even glanced at the cabin. My daughter was already out there again, sitting in the same spot, line cast into the water, red folder beside her. I watched from the porch, arms crossed loosely over my chest, sipping coffee that had long gone cold. Karen shifted from one foot to the other, clearly debating whether to come closer or pretend she'd never been involved at all. But then she caught sight of me and walked up the path anyway. Good morning, she said, her voice too light, the kind of voice people use when they've already lost but still want to appear composed. I nodded once. Morning. She looked down toward the water again. Your daughter's out early. She always is. A pause settled between us. The breeze moved the trees just enough to fill the silence, but she didn't leave. I didn't realize you were Walter Holloway's son, she said, carefully choosing the words. Didn't realize a lot of things, seems like, I said, not unkindly. She flinched slightly but held her ground. I've spoken with some of the other board members, she continued. We didn't have the full picture before. Your parcel was listed under an old zoning boundary. It looks like that area wasn't absorbed when the HOA was formed. That's because my father made sure it wouldn't be. She gave a tight nod. Well, I suppose I was working with outdated records. It happens. I let the words hang there. She wanted something from me. Not forgiveness exactly, but a chance to walk away without more shame. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But there was something beneath the surface now, a ripple of doubt that hadn't been there before. Your daughter, she said after a moment. She's very composed. Most kids wouldn't know how to handle that kind of scene. She's been through worse. Karen looked away, eyes following the breeze out toward the lake. I've been trying to keep the community in order, she said. That's all. After Mr. Thompson passed, there wasn't much structure left. It's hard when people stop showing up to meetings, stop reading the updates. Someone has to enforce the rules. I said nothing, just watched her wrestle with the need to justify herself. I could see the cracks now, not in her authority, but in her certainty. Her power had never been questioned before, not like this. She wasn't used to being told she was wrong and having the proof handed back in neat plastic sleeves. I thought she was just some kid wandering down to the dock, Karen said softly. I didn't know. That's the problem, I said. You didn't ask. She shifted again, looked down at her clipboard, then folded it against her side. Well, I hope there won't be any hard feelings. We're all neighbors after all. We've always been neighbors. You just didn't see us. For the first time, she didn't have a reply ready. Her eyes dropped for a second, and something in her face softened. Not regret, not fully, but maybe the beginning of it. I'll make sure the board has updated records, she said. You do that. Karen gave one final glance toward my daughter, who was still watching the water like nothing in the world had changed. Then she turned and walked back the way she came. Slower this time, not defeated, but thoughtful. Her sandals crunched over the gravel, and she didn't look back once. When the path was quiet again, I walked down to the dock. She looked different, my daughter said. She feels different, I replied. I think she's scared. Maybe. Or maybe she just saw herself clearer than she wanted to. My daughter reeled in the line slowly, checked the hook, and cast again with a smooth flick of her wrist. She didn't say sorry. No, I said, but she stayed long enough to realize she probably should have. We sat in the quiet for a while. The lake shimmered under the morning light, calm and steady, the kind of calm that didn't need to be defended, only remembered. The first time I held the deed in my hands, it didn't feel like a piece of paper. It felt like a promise. My father had passed 6 months earlier, and I found it tucked inside a leather folder at the back of his closet, wrapped in a handkerchief and sealed with an old red ribbon. The handwriting on the outside was his, still steady, still sharp. It read only my name, underlined once. I sat on the floor and read it by the thin light of a dusty lamp. The language was old, dry, full of legal phrases and parcel numbers, but the meaning was clear. He had put everything into that land. Not just the cabin and the trees, but the idea of it, the safety, the quiet. He had made sure it would never fall into hands that didn't know how to listen to it. At the bottom of the page was a signature line he had never filled in. Instead, there was a note on the last sheet in his voice, written by hand. This land belongs to our family. Let it give her the peace it gave you. If she ever needs to hear me, tell her to sit on the dock when the wind's up. I'll be there. That was the day I decided the cabin wouldn't be mine. It would be hers. I spent the next few weeks going through the proper channels. I updated the title, had it transferred into my daughter's name, with a clause naming me as guardian and caretaker until she came of age. It wasn't just a legal move. It was a message. She would always have something that couldn't be taken, questioned, or lost. A place that belonged to her and no one else. We laminated the new deed together and slipped it into a clear sleeve. She didn't ask why I was doing it, not directly, but she handled the pages with care. Her hands were small, but she held the paper like it mattered, like she could feel the weight of it even without knowing the whole story. When I told her it was hers, she didn't smile right away. She just looked at the cabin, then at the dock, then at the trees. Finally, she asked if it meant no one could make her leave. I said yes. She nodded and tucked the folder into her backpack without another word. The next time we visited the lake, she walked the perimeter of the property like a ranger. She pointed out the old rock wall my father had built, the line of birch trees along the eastern edge, the shallow bend in the water where minnows danced in the reeds. She knew every inch. She'd memorized it like scripture. And then there was the dock. She never let anyone else fish from it first, even when cousins came to visit, even when neighbors wandered over. She would let them join her, hand them a pole, offer up bait, but she'd always be the first to cast. It wasn't pride, it was something quieter than that, a ritual. A way of saying, this is mine, and I'm sharing it because I want to, not because I have to. I watched her grow into that space. Each summer she moved with more confidence, more ease. She learned the patterns of the birds. She timed the dragonflies. She even started painting the lake, mixing the colors herself with tiny jars she carried down in an old tackle box. The cabin changed too. What had once been my father's became something softer. We added curtains she picked out, a wind chime made from driftwood and bottle caps, a new doormat that read, "Ours." She painted a small wooden sign and nailed it above the door. It had our last name and a date that meant nothing to anyone but us. She asked once if people would believe the cabin belonged to a kid. I told her they wouldn't have to believe it. They could read it. The paper was real. The county had her name on file. And if anyone came asking, she could hand them the deed without saying a word. She liked that. I could see it in the way she walked after that. Taller, steadier, not because she was trying to prove anything, but because she knew she didn't have to. When Karen stood at the edge of the water that day and saw the folder in my daughter's lap, I think she realized what she was really up against. Not just a family with documents and signatures, but a legacy. A quiet, solid inheritance that didn't shout or fight but stood its ground all the same. The deed wasn't just a title, it was a shield, one built from love, memory, and patience. And my daughter knew how to hold it. Karen came back again 2 days later, but something about her had shifted. Her voice wasn't quite so sharp, her steps not quite so sure. She came without the golf cart this time. No entourage in visors or barking dogs, just her and that same clipboard tucked under one arm like it still gave her authority. I was trimming the hedges by the side of the porch, clippers slow and steady, when I heard her shoes crunch across the gravel. She stopped a few feet from the steps. I didn't speak. I kept clipping one branch at a time, like the weight of this moment wasn't mine to carry. I talked to the board again, she said. We're updating the zoning documents to reflect the boundary you showed the sheriff. We'll mark it clearly on the map so there's no confusion next season. I nodded and set the clippers aside. That would help. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, eyes squinting toward the lake. My daughter was painting at the end of the dock, brush in hand, her knees tucked to her chest. Karen watched her for a long moment. You know, I said finally, this cabin is older than your HOA. She glanced at me. I suppose it might be. No supposing. My father built it in 75, hauled the timber in by hand, laid the first stones himself. That dock's been repaired 3 times over, and every time we used the same blueprint. This place didn't just show up when you started hosting meetings, it's got roots. She looked back at the cabin. Well, things change. Communities form. People organize. People organize when they forget who was here first. Her shoulders tensed slightly at that. Not enough to argue, but just enough to show the words landed. I didn't mean to cause trouble, she said. I just thought... She trailed off. There wasn't a neat way to finish it. You thought we didn't belong here, I said for her. You saw a girl with a fishing pole and made up your mind before you asked a single question. She looked down at the clipboard like it might offer a way out, but it didn't. The breeze lifted the edge of one of the pages, revealing a printed map underneath. Her fingers pressed it flat again. I've lived here 11 years, she said. I've never seen you before this summer. We don't come to be seen. We come to breathe. She let out a quiet breath, the kind you don't realize you're holding until it slips past your teeth. I didn't know about your father, she said, or the trail, or the court thing. He didn't do it for credit. No, I suppose not. Another pause settled between us. This one was softer, less like a standoff, more like 2 people standing in the same silence and trying to decide what to do with it. I wasn't trying to erase anything, she said. I just wanted things to be in order. There's a difference between order and control. She nodded slowly. I see that now. We stood like that for a while. I didn't offer her a seat. She didn't ask for one. I could see her eyes drifting to the lake again, to the girl with the paintbrush who hadn't once turned to look at us. She's talented, Karen said. The little one. She's not so little anymore. Still, she sees things. I smiled then just a little. She sees everything. Karen looked back toward the trees, toward the path she'd walked up more than once that week, the path she now seemed in no hurry to take again. Well, she said, straightening her back, I'll make sure the minutes reflect the update. The board can be stubborn, but they'll listen to what's in writing. They usually do, I said. She gave one small nod and turned to leave. No wave, no goodbye. Just a quiet retreat back down the gravel. The sun was behind her, casting long shadows that reached all the way to the porch. When she was gone, I picked up the clippers again. The hedge was only halfway done, and the light was still good. From the dock, I heard my daughter hum a soft tune. Not a song I recognized, just something she made up as she worked. The kind of tune you only sing when you know no one's going to interrupt. And for the first time in days, I believed no one would. The apology never came. Not the day after, when Karen passed our driveway on her morning walk and glanced toward the porch without stopping. Not the afternoon she delivered updated notices to the cabins on either side of ours but skipped our mailbox entirely. Not even at the end of the week when the HOA newsletter showed up in town with a small note tucked near the bottom that read, "Boundary clarification ongoing for select parcels on the east shoreline." No names. No acknowledgement. Just a quiet correction spoken in the voice of someone hoping no one would remember how it started. I didn't need the apology, not really. It wouldn't have changed anything. But part of me watched for it, not because I wanted her words, but because my daughter deserved to hear them. She had been the one accused, questioned, dismissed, all without raising her voice or stepping out of place. She had held that folder steady like a shield and waited for the world to catch up, and it had. But still, no one said sorry. The neighbors grew friendlier. One brought over a pie he claimed was extra, though the pan was still warm and wrapped in a dish towel. Another asked about the best places to buy fishing bait nearby, though he had lived in the area longer than I had. The man across the way waved every time he saw us, like clockwork. These were gestures, quiet and careful, meant to say, "We know now," without dragging up the shame of not knowing before. Karen remained distant. She didn't come back down to the dock. She didn't speak to my daughter, but she didn't speak over her either. That was something. One evening, just as the sun was setting, I saw her walking past with her phone in one hand and a folder in the other. She paused at the bend in the path where the trees split just wide enough to reveal the lake. She looked out for a long time, eyes following the waterline. My daughter was sketching again, her knees drawn to her chest, charcoal moving fast across the page. Karen watched her for a moment, then kept walking. When I told my daughter that the woman probably wasn't going to say anything, she just shrugged. "She doesn't have to," she said. "You sure?" She nodded. She looked different the last time, like she knew. I thought about that for a while, about what it meant to be wrong, and what it took to admit it even without words. There's a kind of apology people carry in their eyes when they don't know how to say one out loud. It's heavy. It clings to them, reshaping their posture, slowing their steps. I'd seen it in Karen, in the way her voice had softened, the way her grip on that clipboard had loosened. Sometimes, change doesn't come with a speech. Sometimes, it comes in silence. Still, I caught myself wishing that she had said it plainly, that she had looked my daughter in the eyes and said, "I was wrong about you. I made assumptions. I treated you like you didn't belong, and I'm sorry. I wanted that for her, not for me." But the world rarely gives you all its corners smoothed. Sometimes you just have to live with the wrinkle. The next morning, my daughter came to me with a piece of paper. "I want to make a sign," she said, "for the dock." I asked what she had in mind. She showed me the words, printed neatly in pencil, each one measured with care. It said, "Private dock. All welcome. Please, ask first." I read it twice, then again. "You sure?" I asked. She nodded. "We know it's ours, but it's better when people feel like they can be part of it too." We built the sign together that afternoon, painted it soft blue, the color of the lake in the early morning. She staked it into the ground just off the path. Not flashy, not loud, just there. Karen walked past the next evening. She saw it. She paused for just a moment, her eyes resting on the words. Then she kept walking. And even though the apology never came, the message had been heard. It started with Mr. Langston. He showed up on our porch with a small folding chair tucked under one arm and a brown paper bag in the other. Said he used to fish off the dock back when Walter Holloway owned it, back when the trees were taller and the waterline came all the way up to the rock wall. I remembered him from a distance. He lived 2 cabins down and never spoke much, always out early, always gone by dusk. This time he asked if it was all right to sit a while. I told him it was. He nodded once, slow and sure, and set his chair down beside the porch. From the paper bag he pulled a jar of homemade pickles and handed them over like a peace offering. My daughter thanked him and disappeared into the kitchen with them. He didn't talk much after that, just looked out toward the dock and smiled every now and then, like he was remembering something that mattered. The next day it was the Jacksons, retired couple from across the road. They came by with 2 old photo albums and a tin of shortbread cookies. said they wanted to show my daughter the photos of the cabin being built. Their father had helped dig the footings, back when my dad was still learning how to mix concrete by hand. We spent an hour flipping through yellowed snapshots of bare lumber and muddy boots, of men laughing over sawdust and sunburns. My daughter didn't say much, but she kept touching the edges of the photos like they were made of glass. Then came the Rileys, the boy from Lot 3, even quiet Mrs. Haynes from the hill who barely spoke above a whisper. People who hadn't said a word to us all summer started appearing one by one, offering baked bread, old stories, hand-me-down fishing gear, even a book about local birds my daughter had once mentioned in passing. No one brought up Karen. No one said a thing about the sheriff or the clipboards or the argument that had pulled the lake into its center. But the timing wasn't lost on me. It wasn't guilt exactly, but something close. People wanted to show they saw us now, that whatever story had been told before, they were ready to hear a different one. At first, it was odd to see so many folks passing through the yard. The cabin had always been a quiet place. My father used to say that it wasn't built to host, it was built to hold. But I could tell my daughter didn't mind. She listened to every story, nodded patiently at every memory, and asked questions that made even the oldest voices light up. One morning, we found a bouquet of wildflowers on the dock bench. No note, just stems bound in twine and placed gently beside the tackle box. A few days later, someone left a painted rock at the cabin steps. It had a dragonfly on one side and the word welcome in careful script on the other. The wind chime over the porch started singing more often, not because the breeze had changed, but because more people walked past. They moved slower now. They looked at the sign my daughter had made. Some took off their hats. Some gave a small wave, and some just paused, as if seeing the dock for the first time, even though it had been there all along. I saw Karen once during all this. She didn't stop, just walked past with her sunglasses on, arms folded tight. A few people nodded to her. She didn't nod back. My daughter didn't bring her up anymore. When someone asked about the sheriff, she just said there had been a misunderstanding. When they asked about the deed, she smiled and said her grandpa had planned ahead. She had learned something I hadn't, that sometimes dignity is the quietest kind of strength, that it doesn't need to be proven or shouted. It just sits still while the rest of the world catches up. By the end of the week, the dock had more footprints than it had all summer, and not once did anyone step on without asking first. That's when I knew something had shifted, not just in the people but in the air itself. The lake didn't feel like it had to defend itself anymore. It just held the reflections of those willing to see clearly. And for the first time in years, the cabin felt full. Not crowded, not noisy, just full, in the way a place feels when it's finally understood. She never asked for attention. Not once during the whole thing. Not when the woman pointed and shouted. Not when the officers stepped out of their cars. Not even when the sheriff himself stood in front of her like he was waiting for something to go wrong. My daughter just held her folder close, kept her back straight, and let the world talk around her. That quiet she carried, it wasn't the kind born from shyness. It was steadier than that. She had learned early on that people often spoke the loudest when they were unsure. And when they were trying to prove something, they made noise to fill the space where truth should have been. She never needed to do that. She just waited. She watched. She listened until it was her turn. The thing about my daughter is that she notices everything. Always has. She saw the woman's face the moment the sheriff opened that red folder. She watched her step back, mouth pressed tight, hands twitching at her sides. She saw the way the neighbors lingered behind their screens when the patrol cars came. And she noticed the way they looked at us afterward, first with curiosity, then guilt, then something like respect. After it all settled down, I asked her how she stayed so calm. She thought about it for a moment, chewing a bit on the inside of her cheek like she does when she's turning something over in her mind. "Because you weren't scared," she said. "And if you weren't scared, I figured I didn't need to be." It's strange hearing that kind of logic from someone who still tucks herself under too many blankets when it storms. But she wasn't wrong. I had been angry, yes, but not afraid, because I knew the truth. And so did she. The day after the sheriff left, she sat down and made a watercolor of the dock. She didn't try to make it perfect. The lines were soft, the water pale green, but the shapes were right. The curve of the bank, the split in the pine that framed the lake just so. Even the old rope hanging from the post that we never got around to cutting. She titled it, belonging. She didn't say why. A few days later, one of the older neighbors asked her about the deed, not in a nosy way, more like someone trying to understand how a kid ended up holding something so official in her hands while grown adults scrambled to explain themselves. My daughter smiled politely and said her grandpa had trusted her with something important. She didn't talk about the court filings, the signatures, the line at the clerk's office. She just said, "He gave it to me because he knew I'd protect it." She didn't mean the paper. She meant the place. One evening we sat on the dock as the sun folded itself behind the trees. I asked her if she thought the others would ever stop looking at us like we were the new ones. "I don't mind being new," she said. "New things make people pay attention." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because she said it like someone twice her age. There's a kind of strength people don't always recognize. The kind that doesn't come from standing tall or shouting loud. The kind that shows up in the way someone keeps showing up. The way they hold their place without apology. The way they speak only when it matters. And even then, only with what's needed. That's the kind of strength my daughter carries. I saw it when she stepped onto that dock with her folder tucked under her arm. I saw it when she told the sheriff her name without flinching. I saw it when she offered cookies to the woman who brought the photo albums, not because she had to, but because she wanted to make someone feel at home. She's not loud. She doesn't take over a room, but she knows how to fill it. And now, the cabin doesn't feel like mine anymore. It feels like hers. Her drawings hang from the fridge, her boots sit by the door. Her voice carries through the trees when she's laughing at her own jokes. She's made it a home, not just a place to visit. That dock she sits on, it's more than wood and nails. It's a line she held, a truth she didn't back down from. And every time I see her there, with the water soft around her and the wind in her hair, I know she didn't just inherit the cabin. She earned it. The cabin was never built to be impressive. It didn't have a grand porch or shiny fixtures or anything that made people stop and stare. The walls were pine, the windows were old, and the roof had been patched so many times it looked like a quilt of mismatched shingles. But it stood. Through rain, wind, and seasons that came too early or stayed too long, it held its ground like it had nowhere else to be. My father used to say that places like this outlive people, that if you build something with care and let it breathe, it'll remember you long after you're gone. He didn't mean the boards or the nails. He meant the feeling, the quiet, the space it gave you when the rest of the world got too loud. I thought about that one morning as I watched my daughter sweep the porch. She didn't do it because I asked. She did it the way my father used to, slow and steady, making sure the dust didn't settle too thick in the corners. She wore his old work gloves, the ones that still smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. She said they fit her now, though the fingers were still too long. Inside, the table had a new cloth she picked out from town. The couch had a blanket she crocheted herself, not perfect but warm. The bookshelf had grown crowded, not with thick classics but with sketch pads, field guides, and a stack of picture books, she said, reminded her of her mother. She never let me move those. The wind had stripped some of the paint from the shutters again, and the steps creaked louder than they used to, but I didn't rush to fix them. Not yet. The cabin had always spoken in small sounds. It breathed in groans and whispers. That was part of its charm. You couldn't live in it without learning its rhythm. One afternoon I found my daughter sitting cross-legged beneath the front window, surrounded by boxes. She was going through my father's things, carefully unwrapping old tools, maps, faded receipts. She didn't throw anything away. She sorted. She labeled. She asked questions. "What was this for?" she asked, holding up a brass compass. He used it to find the property lines back before the roads were marked. Did he ever get lost? Only on purpose. She smiled at that and tucked the compass into her backpack, said it felt like it belonged with her sketchbook. She carried the history of this place the same way she carried the deed close, but not heavy. She understood the weight without letting it slow her down. And she never brought up Karen anymore. Not once. The name had disappeared from our days like fog lifting off the lake. The hurt wasn't forgotten, but it had been folded into something else. A lesson maybe. A turning point. One more story added to the cabin's walls. Every night before bed I stepped out onto the porch to listen. Not for trouble, not for voices or movement, just for the sound of the woods settling. Sometimes I heard an owl, sometimes just the breeze. But it always reminded me of the first night I stayed here alone after my father passed. I had expected the silence to be unbearable. Instead, it felt like someone placing a hand on your shoulder and not needing to speak. The cabin had survived him. It would survive me. And someday, it would stand here still, when my daughter brought her own children, or maybe her friends, or maybe no one at all. Maybe she'd sit on the dock with grey in her hair and remember the way I used to patch the roof crooked or burn the pancakes or hum off-key when I thought no one was listening. And the cabin would remember too. Not in words, not in dates or plaques or framed certificates, but in the slow swing of the screen door, in the way the floor dipped near the back room, in the smell of pine after a storm. It would remember how we lived, how we stayed, and how, no matter who showed up or what they said, we never let go of what was ours. We painted the sign on a Saturday morning. The sky was pale and wide, and the lake hadn't quite shaken off the last of its mist. My daughter had already chosen the board and old plank from the shed with a knot near the center that looked like a sleepy eye. She said it gave the wood character. I told her character was another word for something people forgot to fix. She laughed and dipped her brush in the paint. The letters were her design, careful block print with a steady hand, measured by ruler and string. She didn't want anything fancy, no flourishes or curling script, just words that said what they meant. Private dock. Welcome to those who respect it. She painted them in dark green, said it matched the pines and wouldn't scare anyone off. I watched her from the porch, sipping coffee that had gone cold again. She was on her knees, brush in one hand, tongue caught in the corner of her mouth like it always was when she focused too hard. The sign came together slowly. She didn't rush. When it was finished, she held it up to the sun like it needed drying under something holy. We carried it down together. The grass was damp, but the dock was warm. She chose the spot where the path met the shoreline, just before the boards started. She hammered the stake into the ground herself. 3 solid hits, each one loud and certain. Then she stepped back and looked at it like it had always been there. There, she said. Now they'll know. They should have known already, I said. But this helps, she replied. She was right. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about stating the truth plainly, without spite. The sign wasn't a warning. It was a reminder. It said, "You are welcome, but only if you see us." That evening, someone left a folded note on our porch. No name, just a small message in tidy script. We didn't know. Now we do. Thank you for staying. We pinned it to the fridge with one of her magnets, right next to the watercolor of the dock and the photo of my father holding her as a baby, both of them squinting into the sun. She didn't ask who it was from. I didn't either. The days grew softer after that, quieter in a different way. Not the hush of suspicion, but the calm that follows when things settle where they belong. The neighbors kept coming by. Some stayed a while. Some just nodded from the path. But no one questioned the dock anymore. No one spoke with the voice of someone checking for violations. One morning, the boy from Lot 3 asked if he could fish off the end. My daughter looked at him, then at the sign, then back at him. "Did you bring bait?" she asked. He held up a tin of worms and grinned. She nodded. "Then go ahead. Just don't mess up the view." He took off his shoes and sat cross-legged at the end of the dock, line dangling into the green water. She sat beside him, sketchbook open, drawing his silhouette with quick, quiet lines. From the porch, I watched the two of them sit like that until the sun slid behind the trees and the lake turned silver. No one raised their voice, no one told them to leave, no one needed to. That's the thing about claiming space. Once it's done, it doesn't have to be loud. It just has to last. The sign stayed up all summer. Rain hit it hard a few times, and the edges warped a little, but the paint never faded. I checked the stake every few weeks, made sure it didn't wobble. Each time I did, I'd find new footprints in the grass nearby. Small ones, heavy ones, careful ones. Signs that people had come, had paused, had read. By the end of the season, the dock had seen more visitors than it had in years. But no one ever stepped on without asking first. No one ever questioned who it belonged to. And every time my daughter sat on the end, feet swinging just above the water, she looked more and more like someone who had been born into that place, like someone who didn't need to fight for what was hers anymore. The cabin was quiet again, the kind of quiet that feels earned. The kind that knows the wind will shift and the seasons will change, but some things, like names on deeds, like truths told calmly, like signs that welcome without apology, will stay.